It was a typical rush-hour evening on the subway in New York City, the train packed with tired commuters heading home after a long day. The air was thick with exhaustion, the faint hum of the train's wheels on the tracks the only sound. But, amidst the quiet chatter and occasional rattle of the car, something was different this evening. In the corner of the car, a man in his mid-30s sat quietly, his eyes downcast. His face held a certain weariness, the kind you get from fighting for something bigger than yourself. His name was Marcus, and like many others, he was just trying to get through another day. But not everyone on the train seemed as concerned with that. A group of young men, maybe in their 20s, were causing a ruckus a few seats away. They were loud, boisterous, and had clearly made it their mission to ruin Marcus's peace. They started with taunts, small things at first, like making fun of the way he dressed or mocking his headphones. But soon the comments turned more hostile. Racial slurs, insults, the kind of words that no one should have to hear, let alone on their way home. The train rumbled along the tracks as the tension in the car grew. Marcus, trying his best to ignore them, kept his head down. But the insults were relentless, growing louder by the second. And then it happened. One of the men shoved Marcus, pushing him roughly against the side of the train. The others laughed. The laughter echoed throughout the car, drowning out everything else. Marcus was taken aback, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just an insult anymore. It was something worse. Just then, as if fate had a hand in it, the door to the next car slid open. A tall figure stepped through, a calm, composed presence that seemed to freeze the entire car. It was Keanu Reeves. Yes, the Keanu Reeves. He didn't walk in with a spotlight on him or a dramatic entrance. He simply entered, dressed casually, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the situation without a word. Keanu saw what was happening. He took a few steps forward, his gaze focused on the group of men who were still laughing. His expression, calm and unwavering, said everything without saying a word. He could have just walked on by, keeping his distance like so many others might have. But Keanu wasn't like everyone else. He stopped. And then he spoke. "Hey, that's enough." The train fell silent. The air seemed to thicken. The laughter stopped. The group of men paused, confused for a moment, their eyes shifting from Keanu to Marcus and back again. They had expected no resistance, but now they were faced with someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. "Who the hell are you?" one of the men sneered, sizing Keanu up. Keanu didn't flinch. He looked at the man, his voice steady, without anger, but with undeniable authority. "Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is this," he said, his eyes scanning the group. "This isn't how we treat people. This needs to stop." The tension in the air was palpable. It was a standoff. The group of bullies clearly hadn't expected someone to challenge them, let alone someone as well known as Keanu Reeves. And as they took a step forward, ready to escalate the situation, something inside them changed. What happens when you push someone to the edge and they stand up for what's right? Before the situation could get worse, Keanu stepped in with quiet strength, looking at Marcus and giving him a nod as if saying, "I've got this." But the question now was clear. Would the bullies back down, or would this moment escalate even further? Before we dive deeper into what happens next, hit the subscribe button and stay tuned. This story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Keanu's presence in the subway car was like a sudden calm after a storm. The bullies, who had been so sure of their power moments ago, now hesitated. They glanced nervously at each other, unsure of how to proceed with a man they clearly didn't expect to stand in their way. But Keanu wasn't the type to back down. He didn't need to raise his voice or puff out his chest. He simply stood there, calm and collected, his eyes steady on the group of bullies. His silence was louder than any words could have been. Marcus, still pressed against the side of the train, blinked, unsure of what to do. For a moment he didn't even register who was standing in front of him. The weight of the insults and the physical shove had left him in shock. But then it clicked. Keanu Reeves, the actor, the one who'd been a fixture in films like The Matrix and John Wick, was standing up for him. Keanu turned slightly, glancing at Marcus for a brief moment. There was no judgment in his gaze, just a quiet understanding, as if saying, "I see you. I'm here." That small gesture of solidarity was enough to snap Marcus out of his daze. He stood up straighter, his eyes meeting Keanu's for a split second, feeling a flicker of hope. Could this really be happening? Was someone actually standing up for him? The bullies, on the other hand, were still processing the situation. The leader of the group, a tall guy with a scruffy beard, sneered at Keanu. "What's the deal, man? You want to make something of it?" Keanu didn't move, didn't flinch. His expression remained unchanged, but his voice dropped lower, carrying an undeniable weight. "It's not about me, it's about him." He nodded toward Marcus. "You don't get to treat people like this." Marcus felt a strange sense of power surge through him. The years of silently enduring racism, the countless times he'd been pushed around or belittled, all seemed to dissolve in that one moment. Keanu wasn't just some actor. He was a symbol of the fight against injustice. And here he was, standing. Beside him, the man with the scruffy beard glared at Keanu, but the others in the group were starting to look less sure of themselves. There was a tension in the air that wasn't just from the threat of violence. It was the uncertainty of what might happen next. Would they back down? Would they get physical? Or would they, for once, realize the gravity of their actions? Keanu stepped forward, not aggressively, but with an air of quiet authority. "You need to leave him alone now." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment it seemed as though the bullies might back off. But then the leader, the one who had started it all, looked back at his friends with a mischievous grin. "Oh, so now we're going to play the hero, huh?" He stepped closer to Keanu, his fists clenched. "What, you think you can just come in here and tell us what to do?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Keanu didn't move. He didn't need to. The calmness in his demeanor sent a clear message. "I'm not afraid of you." The train rumbled on, the lights flickering as it passed through tunnels, the space between the two men growing more intense by the second. Keanu's body language was poised, but there was no sign of aggression. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to make sure the right thing happened, and then, just when the tension seemed like it might snap, something unexpected happened. The bully with the scruffy beard stopped, his expression faltering. He looked at Keanu, then at Marcus, then back to Keanu. A shift seemed to happen in his eyes, a realization, maybe even a touch of doubt. Keanu's words had settled into his mind, their weight growing heavier with each passing second. But it wasn't just Keanu's presence. It was the quiet dignity that Marcus held in his eyes, the man who had refused to let their cruelty break him, and the simple truth that no one deserved to be treated like that. The bully took a step back, and then another. His friends glanced at one another, unsure of what to do next. Finally, the scruffy-bearded man exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Whatever, man. This isn't worth it." And just like that, the moment of confrontation was over. The group of bullies who had moments ago been so sure of their power began to retreat, their bravado fading with every step. Marcus didn't know what to say. He just stood there, the adrenaline from the confrontation still rushing through his veins. The train doors opened at the next stop, and the bullies quickly exited, muttering under their breath as they left. Keanu turned to Marcus, giving him a small, reassuring nod. "You all right?" Marcus nodded, still in a bit of shock. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I didn't know what to do." Keanu smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made Marcus feel like he wasn't alone in the world. "Sometimes we just need someone to show up for us. I'm glad I could be that someone today." The train doors closed again, and the city continued to rush by. But for Marcus, the rest of the ride felt different. He wasn't just a random passenger on a subway car anymore. He was someone who had been seen, who had been protected, and who had just witnessed a powerful moment of solidarity. Keanu turned and began to walk toward the door of the subway car, but before he left, he glanced back at Marcus. "Take care of yourself, all right?" With that, Keanu was gone, leaving Marcus standing there, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. The city around him seemed a little less harsh, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. But what happens when You face your fears and stand up for what's right. Don't go anywhere. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep going. This story is just getting started. As the train continued its journey through the bustling city, Marcus sat back, still processing everything that had just happened. The subway car that had once felt so oppressive, filled with tension and uncertainty, now felt strangely lighter. He glanced around, half expecting to see the bullies lurking in the corner, but they were gone, vanishing as quickly as they had arrived. The silence in the car was almost comforting. It felt like a moment of peace after the storm, a chance for Marcus to breathe. He had been through worse, of course. He had grown up in a world that wasn't always kind, where people looked at him differently, judged him based on the color of his skin. But today was different. Today, he had been seen. Today, someone had stood up for him, someone powerful and respected, someone who didn't even hesitate to act. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the train lull him into a kind of calm. But the peace didn't last long. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He pulled it out, unlocking it to find several missed calls and text messages. The first message was from his mom. "Are you okay? I heard what happened on the subway. Please call me." He frowned, wondering how she had found out. He quickly typed a reply, reassuring her that he was fine and that nothing serious had happened. It wasn't until he glanced at the news app on his phone that he understood how she had known. The headline read, "Keanu Reeves steps in to defend man from bullies on New York subway." The article had already gone viral. There, in the blurry image accompanying the story, was a snapshot of the subway car, with Keanu standing face to face with the bullies, his calm presence unmistakable. And just behind him, barely visible, was Marcus. The realization hit him hard. It wasn't just a random act of kindness. It had been witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people. Marcus had become part of a story that might change things. His heart raced. What if people didn't see him as a victim, but as someone who had been defended by one of the most famous actors in the world? He couldn't help but wonder how the world would perceive him now. But before his thoughts could spiral, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his best friend, Jason. "Man, I saw what happened on the subway. That was crazy. Are you okay? Need to talk about it?" Marcus smiled faintly and replied, "I'm good. A little shaken up, but I'll be all right. Let's talk soon." Jason had always been there for him, and now more than ever, Marcus knew he could count on him. He didn't need to explain everything to Jason. The story would speak for itself. The train arrived at his stop, and Marcus got off, stepping onto the familiar pavement of his neighborhood. The city was alive around him, the sounds of traffic and people bustling through their daily routines. But today, everything felt different. People were noticing him. They weren't just walking by anymore, ignoring the world around them. His encounter with Keanu, though fleeting, had made him feel seen, important, and most of all, empowered. As he walked home, his mind kept replaying the events of the evening. Keanu had been there for him in a way that he never could have expected. But the real question was, why? Why had Keanu stood up for him? The actor had no reason to intervene. He didn't know Marcus. They were strangers. So what was it that had made Keanu act? The answer was simple, Marcus realized. It wasn't about who Marcus was or where he came from. It wasn't about fame or status. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. Keanu had stepped in because he believed in justice, in standing up for the underdog, and in treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background. Marcus had always believed in the importance of community, of looking out for one another, but seeing it in action like this, it had changed something in him. Maybe it was time for him to do more than just get by. Maybe it was time for him to start standing up for himself, for others. He had spent so long feeling like he was just one face in the crowd, struggling to make it through another day. But now he felt like he had a voice, and not just any voice. The voice, the one that could make a difference. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of what could come next. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining all the different ways he could use this newfound sense of empowerment. What could he do with it? How could he make an impact? He didn't know the answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this moment pass him by. The next morning, he woke up to dozens of messages. Friends, family, even strangers were reaching out, thanking him for what had happened. Some were simply offering support, others asking how they could help. Marcus wasn't sure how to process it all. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. He had never thought something so small could make such a big difference, but as he scrolled through his phone, he saw something else. There was a tweet from Keanu himself. "Stand up for each other. We're all in this together." It was simple, powerful, and made Marcus feel like the world was just a little bit smaller, a little bit more connected. Now that Marcus had been part of something bigger, where would he go from here? Would he let this moment define him, or would it be the catalyst for something much larger? Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned as the story unfolds. Things are just getting started, and Marcus's journey is about to take a turn he never expected. Marcus woke up the next morning feeling like the world had shifted beneath his feet. The weight of the previous evening's events hadn't quite settled yet. The subway encounter with Keanu Reeves, the bullies, the media attention, everything felt surreal. He had never imagined his life would change so drastically overnight, yet here he was, with his name circulating across social media platforms, news outlets, and group chats. His phone buzzed non-stop, notifications popping up one after another. News outlets had picked up the story, and suddenly Marcus wasn't just a regular commuter in New York City. He had become part of a narrative of resistance, of standing up for what was right, and it was resonating with people everywhere. One of the messages that stood out the most was from Jason, his best friend. "Dude, you're all over the place. People are talking about it. This is huge. Are you okay?" Marcus texted back quickly. "I'm fine, just trying to wrap my head around all of this. It feels like a dream." Jason's response was almost immediate. "Yeah, it's wild. I can't believe Keanu Reeves just stepped in like that. I mean, that's something out of a movie. You good to talk later? We need to hang." Marcus was grateful for Jason's support. Despite the media frenzy, he knew that his best friend was the one person who wouldn't treat him any differently. He needed that sense of normalcy right now. After all, his life had just been turned upside down in the span of one subway ride. As he got dressed and prepared for the day, he couldn't help but wonder how long this moment of fame would last. How long would people be talking about it? Would they forget soon, or was this the start of something bigger? And what did it mean for him personally? The attention was overwhelming, but it was also empowering. By the time Marcus made it to work, it was clear that his life had irrevocably changed. Colleagues at the office greeted him with knowing smiles, some even asking for autographs or selfies, much to his discomfort. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the attention, it was just that it felt so strange, so out of nowhere. He found himself constantly checking his phone, waiting for the next message, the next notification, the next article. But it wasn't just about the media. It was about the people who had reached out, people he hadn't spoken to in years, people from all walks of life sending messages of support. He received messages from strangers, sharing stories of their own experiences with bullying and injustice, some even expressing their gratitude for his bravery, for the simple fact that someone had stood up for what was right. It was a humbling feeling, but it was also a heavy one. He had never asked to be a symbol of anything. He had never intended to be part of some grand movement. All he had wanted was to survive the day, to make it home. But now it seemed like he had become a part of something much bigger than himself. At lunch, Marcus sat alone in a corner of the office cafeteria, scrolling through his messages when his phone buzzed again. This time it was from his mom. "Marcus, I'm so proud of you, but I need to ask, what now?" Her message hit him hard. What now? What came after the viral moment? What was he supposed to do with all of this newfound attention? Marcus didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure where to go from here, but one thing was becoming clear: this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the people who had reached out, the people who were now looking at him as someone who could make a difference. He didn't have all the answers, but maybe, just maybe, he could start something. That evening, as he walked home, Marcus found himself deep in thought. The streets of New York were bustling, the usual hustle and bustle of the city carrying on as normal. But for him, everything felt different. He couldn't stop replaying the events of the subway ride in his head. Keanu Reeves's calm demeanor, the bullies' retreat, the sense of solidarity that had momentarily united the strangers in that subway car. It felt like the kind of thing that could change the world, if more people stood up. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a journalist. "Hello, Marcus. We're doing a feature on your encounter with Keanu Reeves. We'd love to hear more about your experience. Can we schedule an interview?" Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether or not he should respond. Part of him was still unsure. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, wasn't sure if he wanted to dive deeper into the spotlight. But another part of him, one that had been awakened in that subway car, felt compelled to share his story. He wasn't just a passive participant in this narrative anymore. He had a voice and he could use it. He could share what had happened, but more importantly, he could share what it meant for him personally. Maybe, just maybe, he could inspire others to stand up too. Marcus took a deep breath and typed out his response. "Yes, I'd be happy to talk. Let's schedule the interview." As soon as he sent it, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. What had started as an unassuming subway ride had turned into something far more significant. And now it seemed like the story was far from over. As Marcus stepped into the unknown, one question lingered in his mind. Could his story really inspire change? Could it spark a movement of people standing up for one another, for what was right? Stay tuned, because the journey has just begun. Marcus's next steps could shape the future in ways he never expected. Hit the subscribe button to find out what happens next. This story is only getting started. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The media storm surrounding Marcus didn't let up. Articles continued to flood the internet, each one focusing on his encounter with Keanu Reeves. The story had taken on a life of its own, with the headline, "Keanu Reeves defends man from subway bullies," going viral across platforms. Marcus had become an unwilling icon of bravery, someone who had unexpectedly found himself at the center of a narrative about standing up for what was right. He had expected the media attention to fizzle out quickly, but it seemed to be growing. With every new article came more interviews, more messages of support, and more people wanting to hear his story. Then came the message that changed everything, an invitation for an interview with Good Morning America. It wasn't just some small-time, a reporter, or a local news outlet. Good Morning America was one of the biggest platforms in the country, and they wanted to hear from him. The idea of being on national television had always been something Marcus never even thought to dream about, let alone consider for himself. But now the possibility seemed real. His story wasn't just a subway moment, it had become a moment for the entire country. The day of the interview, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt for the third time. He was nervous, no, more like terrified. His hands were shaking and his mind was racing. What could he possibly say to the millions of people watching? Was he really the right person to speak on such a broad topic? The doorbell rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. His mum was there, as she had promised. She had been with him through every moment of his life, from the tough times to the good. He could feel her unwavering support, and that comforted him. "You've got this," she said as he opened the door, giving him a warm smile. "Just speak from the heart." He nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. "I don't know if I can do this. It feels like everything's moving too fast." "You've already done the hardest part," she said. "You stood up for yourself. Now you just have to share why." Her words helped settle him. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest, sharing his truth, and doing it. For all the people who had been inspired by his encounter with Keanu, when they arrived at the Good Morning America studio, Marcus could barely contain his nervous energy. The cameras, the crew, the bustling environment, it was like nothing he had ever experienced. He was ushered into a dressing room where a stylist helped him get ready for the segment. The minutes ticked away, each one pulling him closer to the spotlight. He checked his phone one last time, seeing a supportive text from Jason. "You got this, bro. Show the world what you're made of." His nerves began to settle as he thought about his friends, his family, and everyone who had stood by him. He wasn't just doing this for the cameras. He was doing it for them. He was doing it for the people who needed to hear his story. Finally, the moment came. Marcus was escorted to the stage. The bright lights hit him and he could feel the weight of the cameras on him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He looked at the hosts of Good Morning America, who smiled at him warmly. Marcus, one of the hosts, said, "Thank you so much for being here. Your story has touched so many people. But let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us what was going through your mind when you found yourself on that subway train with Keanu Reeves?" Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. This was it. He was about to share his truth with the world. "Well," he began, his voice steady but with a hint of emotion, "it was just a regular day. I was on my way home like everyone else, and then out of nowhere these guys started harassing a black man. It wasn't the first time I've seen something like that, but something about that moment, it felt different. I didn't know what to do at first. I was just trying to get away from it. But then Keanu Reeves of all people, just stepped in. He didn't hesitate. He stood up and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. He stood with me." The host nodded, clearly moved by his words. It's amazing how one person's actions can make such a big difference. Keanu didn't just intervene. He set an example of standing up for what's right. How did that make you feel? Marcus paused, reflecting on the moment. Honestly, it was surreal. Keanu didn't owe me anything. He could have ignored the situation. But he didn't. And in doing so, he made me realize that there's power in showing up. That no matter how small you feel, you matter. And sometimes you just need someone to show you that you're not invisible. The hosts shared a quiet moment of reflection, clearly moved. Marcus, your courage and Keanu's act of kindness have touched so many. What do you hope comes from this? Marcus felt a weight in his chest, but his voice remained clear. I hope people realize that we all have a part to play in making the world better. It doesn't matter who you are or what your background is. When you see something wrong, you have to speak up. You have to step in. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Sometimes just showing someone they're not alone can make all the difference. The host smiled. Wise words. You've shown us all that standing up for what's right can be the most powerful thing you can do. The segment continued with questions about his life, his background, and his thoughts on the future, but Marcus's mind was still buzzing. From the moment when the interview finally wrapped up, Marcus felt lighter. It had been nerve-wracking, but it also felt right. He had shared his truth. He had shared not only what had happened, but what it had meant. As Marcus walked out of the studio, he couldn't help but feel like his life was on the cusp of something new. There was still a long way to go, but in that moment, he knew that standing up for himself, for others, had already started a ripple that could turn into a wave. Keanu had shown up for him when he needed it most, and now he would show up for others. So what happens when a single act of kindness creates a movement? The story's just beginning. Keep watching, because Marcus's journey isn't over yet. Be sure to hit the subscribe button because there's so much more to come. The days following Marcus's Good Morning America appearance passed in a blur. The initial excitement began to settle, but the ripple effect of his subway encounter with Keanu Reeves was far from over. Marcus had become a household name, and with that came an intense amount of attention. People wanted to know everything about him, and everywhere he went there was a sense of being watched, whether it was by cameras, passers-by, or strangers eager to ask for a selfie or a quick chat. But the media frenzy, while flattering, also started to wear on him. Every aspect of his life was under scrutiny. His social media profiles had exploded with both positive and negative comments. The majority of the messages were supportive, people thanking him for speaking out against injustice and expressing how inspired they were by his story. However, there were also the trolls, the critics, the people who mocked him for his newfound fame or questioned his motives. Some even accused him of trying to ride the coattails of Keanu Reeves's fame. It wasn't just the online noise that wore him down. The pressure to live up to the image people had created for him was exhausting. He wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a spokesperson for anything. He was just a regular guy, thrust into an extraordinary situation. But now it felt like the whole world was expecting him to provide answers, to make speeches, to be a symbol of change. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Marcus came across a post that caught his eye. It was a video of a subway altercation from the day before, an incident almost identical to his own. The only difference was that there was no Keanu Reeves this time. A group of bystanders stood frozen while a man was harassed, the situation escalating without intervention. It made Marcus's stomach churn. He wanted to jump into action again, to step in and make it right, but he knew he couldn't be everywhere, at once. And it was overwhelming. In the midst of all this, Marcus found solace in his conversations with Keanu. It had started casually. After the interview on Good Morning America, Marcus had received a direct message from Keanu himself. At first, Marcus had thought it was a fake, one of the countless impersonators that bombarded celebrities' online worlds. But when he clicked on the message and saw that it was verified, he almost dropped his phone. "Hey Marcus, just wanted to say that you did a great job with the interview. I'm glad you're okay. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. No pressure, but take care of yourself. It's a wild ride." Keanu's words, simple and unassuming, were a relief to Marcus. He never expected to hear from the actor again, but here he was, offering support. They began chatting more regularly, sharing their thoughts on the impact of the media and how difficult it could be to maintain a sense of normalcy in such a chaotic time. In their conversations, Keanu had offered advice. Stay grounded. People will say things, both good and bad, but don't lose sight of who you are and why you did what you did. Stay true to yourself. Keanu's words kept Marcus grounded. He was grateful for the actor's kindness, but he also found himself frustrated. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that what Keanu had done wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger. Keanu had been willing to intervene in that moment, but why had it taken a celebrity to make it happen? Why couldn't ordinary people step in the way Keanu did? Marcus thought about this constantly. He had been the one to step up in the subway that day, and yet the entire situation had been overshadowed by Keanu's fame. It wasn't that Marcus resented Keanu. It was the opposite. He respected Keanu more than ever, but the whole thing felt like a reminder that the world often needed a hero with a famous face to see change. It made Marcus wonder if things would have gone differently if Keanu hadn't been there. 1. Afternoon, Marcus met up with Jason for coffee to clear his head. The cafe was small, cozy, and relatively quiet, exactly what he needed. They sat in a corner booth sipping on iced coffees as Jason broke the silence. "You seem off, man," Jason said, peering at him over his cup. Marcus sighed and leaned back in his chair. "It's just been a lot. I mean, all of this, it's overwhelming." Jason nodded. "I get it. The media, the interviews, the expectations. It's a lot to handle. But you've done something really important, Marcus. People are paying attention now." "I know," Marcus replied, "but sometimes I wonder if I'm the right person for this. I didn't ask for any of this. I'm just a guy who didn't want to stand by and let something bad happen." Jason smiled softly. "And that's exactly why people need to hear your story. You're not some perfect hero, Marcus. You're just you. And that's enough. Trust me, this whole thing, what happened in that subway car, it means something. People look up to you because you did what they're too scared to do." "But that's just it," Marcus said, frustration creeping into his voice. "It shouldn't have to be about me. It shouldn't take someone famous, someone like Keanu, for people to care about what's happening on the streets. Why does it always have to be someone with a platform to get noticed? It's like the rest of us don't matter, unless we have that kind of spotlight." Jason's expression softened, and he placed a hand on Marcus's arm. "That's where you're wrong. You don't need to be famous to make an impact. What you did is a ripple. People are paying attention, and even if it doesn't feel like it now, what you've done will inspire more people to act. You're showing that anyone can make a difference. You might not see it yet, but it's happening." Marcus let out a deep breath, absorbing his friend's words. "I guess I just have to let it happen, right?" Jason grinned. "Exactly, just be yourself. And remember, you've got people like me and Keanu who've got your back." As the days turned into weeks, Marcus started to accept the new reality. He wasn't the world's hero, nor did he want to be, but he had made a difference, and that was enough. His life had taken an unexpected turn, but it was clear that the ripple effect was real. People were starting to see the importance of standing up for one another, and that mattered more than any fame or attention. It wasn't about being famous, it was about creating change. And that, Marcus realized, was something he could do with or without the spotlight. The question now was, what would he do next? Stay tuned. The journey is far from over, and the ripple has just begun. Be sure to hit the subscribe button because there's more to come. Months had passed since Marcus's life was thrust into the media spotlight, but things had begun to calm down, at least outwardly. The flood of interviews, public appearances, and messages from strangers had slowed, but the underlying effects of that one subway incident still rippled through his life. The weight of it all had started to feel more like a calling than a mere coincidence. His conversations with Keanu had continued sporadically, but they had shifted to more profound discussions. Keanu often talked about using one's platform, no matter how big or small, to make a real difference. It wasn't about grand gestures, it was about consistent action. And Marcus had begun to realize that while the attention was fading, the opportunity to truly enact change was just beginning. One evening, as Marcus sat in his apartment, the weight of his thoughts felt heavier than usual. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that something more needed to be done, something beyond just the media storm. That was when the call came. It was Jason who first suggested it. They had met for lunch at their usual cafe, when Jason looked at him with a hint of excitement. "Man, I've been thinking," Jason began. "You know how everyone's been talking about what happened with you and Keanu? People are still talking about it, but they're talking about you too. It's not just Keanu now, you've become part of the conversation, about standing up, about doing the right thing. Why not take that energy and channel it into something real? Why not use your platform to do something good?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're in a position to inspire people, to really make them take action. What if you started something, a campaign, or even an organization, to encourage people to stand up for each other, just like you did in the subway? It doesn't have to be big right now. It could start small, but you could start the conversation about what real courage looks like." The idea hit Marcus like a bolt of lightning. At first it felt overwhelming. How could he start a campaign? He wasn't a public speaker. He wasn't an activist. But as Jason continued to outline his ideas, the vision started to become clearer. Marcus wasn't trying to change the world overnight. He just wanted to inspire others to do what he did, not for fame, but because it was the right thing to do. The next few weeks were filled with brainstorming and planning. Marcus had reached out to a few people he knew in the non-profit world, people who could guide him through the process of starting an initiative. It wasn't easy. He was out of his depth in many ways, but he had Jason by his side, and that made all the difference. The idea of the campaign was simple. Stand up. Speak. Out. It was a call for ordinary people to take action in their everyday lives, whether that meant stepping in during an altercation, offering support to someone in need, or simply standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. The campaign would focus on normalizing the idea of standing up for each other, not waiting for someone famous to show up. Keanu Reeves had been a symbol of courage, yes, but it was the everyday heroes who truly had the power to change things. Marcus had already begun to hear stories from people across the country who were inspired by his story. Some of them shared their own subway incidents, while others talked about the small ways they had begun to change their behavior in everyday life. It was clear to him that people didn't need permission to be brave. They just needed a reminder that they could make a difference. One of the first steps in bringing Stand Up, Speak Out to life was creating a website and social media profiles. Marcus felt like a fish out of water as he navigated the technical side of things, but Jason was there every step of the way, guiding him through it. They set up a place for people to share their stories, a forum where anyone could talk about a time when they chose to stand up or help someone. It wasn't about big movements. It was about the small victories, the little decisions to make the world a better place. They also worked on setting up partnerships with various advocacy groups that promoted racial justice, bystander intervention training, and anti-bullying campaigns. Marcus had never been politically active, but he realized that this wasn't about politics. It was about being human. He didn't want to preach to people, he just wanted to show them the value of standing up for each other. Keanu once again became a quiet but steadfast presence in Marcus's journey. During one of their conversations, Keanu offered him some advice that helped Marcus refocus. "Marcus, people are going to look for grand gestures. They'll expect you to make huge changes immediately, but real change doesn't happen with one act. It happens through 1,000 small actions. People don't need to be a hero to be heroic. They just need to show up when it matters." Those words stuck with Marcus. He wasn't trying to be a superhero. He was trying to encourage people to see that they didn't need to wait for the world's heroes to act. They could be those heroes. A month after they had launched the campaign, things started to gain momentum. Stories flooded in from people all over the country. There were tales of people stepping in when they saw someone being bullied or supporting someone in a moment of need. The messages were small, but they were powerful. One story that stood out to Marcus was from a young woman named Aisha. She had written in to share how, after hearing Marcus's story, she had intervened when she saw a homeless man being harassed in her local subway station. Aisha was only in her early 20s, and she didn't consider herself brave, but she said that she felt a shift in herself after watching Marcus on TV. "I thought to myself, if Marcus can step up, then I can too," she had written. "I didn't have to be famous. I just had to do what was right." Her story was just one of many. As the campaign continued, Marcus realized that this was exactly what he had hoped for. People weren't just talking about change, they were creating it every day in their own lives. One day, while he was going over campaign statistics and reading the latest stories of people's actions, Marcus received another message from Keanu. It was short as usual, but the words resonated deeply. "Keep doing what you're doing. You're changing the world one step at a time." Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't experienced in months. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time since that day on the subway, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who decided to step up when it mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that's all it ever took to start something bigger than himself. And so the ripple continued to spread. One small act of kindness, one moment of standing up had become something much bigger. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Be sure to stay tuned. The journey isn't over yet, and there's still so much more to come. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because the fight for change is just getting started. As the Stand Up, Speak Out campaign gained momentum, Marcus felt like he was finally beginning to live up to the responsibility he'd unintentionally taken on. The messages of support continued to pour in, and more people reached out to share their stories. In some ways, it felt like a dream. His message was getting through and he was making a difference. But as things grew, so did the complexity of his new life. What had started as a simple idea to inspire small, everyday acts of kindness had become something much larger. And with that growth came new challenges. It was early on a Wednesday morning when Marcus received the email that would shift everything. It was from a high-profile PR firm, one that had been following the campaign's success. They wanted to help Marcus take it to the next level. At first, Marcus was excited. They were offering resources, connections, and even the possibility of funding. But as he read the email more carefully, he realized there was a catch. They wanted to brand the campaign, turn it into a marketable cause that could bring in revenue. They suggested collaborating with large corporate sponsors and influencers to boost visibility. "Wait a minute," Marcus muttered, furrowing his brow. What happened to the original message? He had always envisioned the campaign as something organic, something real, not a product. He knew that there was potential to scale it, but he wasn't ready for the kind of commercialization they were proposing. He felt conflicted. On one hand, the PR firm could provide him with the means to reach millions of people. On the other hand, he feared it might compromise the integrity of the cause. Marcus decided to take a step back. He reached out to Jason, as he often did when he had to make a tough decision. "Man, they want to turn this into a brand," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I don't know if that's what I want. I don't want this to become just another sponsored cause." Jason, who had been watching Marcus's journey from the beginning, didn't seem surprised. "I get it," Jason said, his voice calm but thoughtful. "But let's be honest, sometimes you need money to make a bigger impact. And there's nothing wrong with partnering with people who can help you do that, as long as you stay true to your message. The key is to find the right balance." Marcus leaned back, still unsure. "But if we start working with all these big brands, it might feel like we're just trying to make a profit off people's pain. I don't want to lose sight of why I started this in the first place." Jason nodded. "True, but what's your ultimate goal? Is it to change lives, or is it just about sticking to your vision in a small, confined space? Sometimes you have to grow and expand to make a real difference, but you have to stay in control of how it grows." Marcus knew Jason was right. He couldn't change the world from a single corner of the internet, no matter how powerful his message was. But how much control was he willing to relinquish? It wasn't an easy decision. A week passed and Marcus's uncertainty only deepened. He received calls from several influencers, all eager to get involved in the campaign, offering their social media reach in exchange for a partnership. Some were people he respected, others were simply looking for a way to capitalize on the movement. It was hard to distinguish between those who genuinely believed in the cause and those who saw it as another opportunity to gain followers. As the offers piled up, Marcus felt a growing tension. He wanted to maintain the authenticity of the campaign, but he also understood that to expand and have a lasting impact, he would need to consider these collaborations. He realized that there was a fine line between staying true to his message and embracing the practical realities of growing an initiative. He had to decide whether to keep it small and authentic or take it to the next level, where it might lose some of its original essence. Meanwhile, a different kind of challenge was brewing. In the months since the subway incident, Marcus's newfound fame had made him a target for those who didn't share his ideals. He had received anonymous threats online, some of which were disturbing in their hostility. At first, he brushed it off, assuming they were just the ramblings of internet trolls. But as the messages grew more aggressive, he began to worry. One evening, as he sat at his desk reading through the latest round of comments, a chilling message appeared in his inbox. "You think you're a hero? You're nothing but a pawn for the system. You should have kept your mouth shut that day. You'll regret getting involved in this." His heart raced as he stared at the screen. He had always known there would be resistance, but he hadn't anticipated the depth of the backlash. What had started as an attempt to inspire good had opened the door to negativity, and now Marcus found himself caught in a whirlwind of mixed messages. On the one hand, there were the people who celebrated his actions, and on the other there were those who resented him for standing up. He felt torn. Every day there were new challenges, questions of identity, purpose, and motivation. Was he really making a difference? Or had he unknowingly become part of the problem? The stress was starting to take its toll. Late one night, Marcus found himself pacing the apartment, the weight of the decisions and threats closing in on him. He needed a break, some time to clear his head. That was when he remembered a conversation he had with Keanu a few weeks ago. Keanu had been through similar challenges, and despite his fame, he was always the first to remind Marcus that he wasn't alone. Marcus reached for his phone and sent Keanu a simple message. "Can we talk? I need some advice." "Within minutes," Keanu replied. "Of course, what's on your mind?" The conversation that followed was the kind of reassurance Marcus desperately needed. Keanu listened as Marcus vented about the pressure, the threats and the uncertainty, about whether to continue or step away from it all. "I get it, Marcus," Keanu said calmly, his words carrying a quiet wisdom. "I've had my fair share of challenges, both professionally and personally. People will always have opinions about you, good and bad, but you can't let that dictate your actions. The moment you start making decisions based on what others think of you, you lose yourself in the process." Keanu continued, "The most important thing is to stay true to your purpose. You're not in this to please everyone. You're in this because you saw something wrong and chose to act. That's it. Whatever happens after that is out of your control." Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he listened. It wasn't about the threats or the offers from PR firms. It was about sticking to what mattered most. He wasn't just trying to make an impact for himself. He was trying to create a ripple to start a movement that could change lives. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I started this for the right reasons, and I'm going to keep going no matter what." Keanu's response was simple. "That's all that matters." With renewed clarity, Marcus decided to turn down the offers to commercialize the campaign. He would keep it grassroots, focusing on the core message of standing up for each other. The challenges were far from over, but he knew now that he could navigate them without losing sight of what really mattered. As he moved forward, the campaign began to shift into its next phase, not based on flashy marketing or corporate partnerships, but on the strength of the people who had already joined the movement. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about everyday acts of courage, and that was all Marcus needed. And so, he continued. Because change didn't happen in one big moment. It happened, step by step, one act of courage at a time. Stay tuned. The story is far from over, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to be part of the journey. As the Stand Up, Speak Out campaign continued to grow, Marcus felt an increasing sense of purpose. The movement was no longer just about him or Keanu. It had become a collective effort. The stories were flowing in from all corners of the country, and the campaign's impact was beginning to extend beyond his expectations. The website had exploded with activity. People were sharing their own experiences, and the media was starting to cover it more widely. It was evident that Marcus was now at the center of something much larger than himself. But as the movement reached new heights, Marcus was struck by something unexpected. A sudden setback, one that threatened to unravel all the progress they had made, loomed on the horizon. It began with an email. It wasn't from the PR firm, or even an angry critic. It came from one of the campaign's initial partners, an organization that had joined the movement early on. The email, short and direct, read, "We regret to inform you that due to unforeseen circumstances, we are no longer able to support the Stand Up, Speak Out campaign. We wish you all the best moving forward." Marcus stared at the message. In disbelief. The organization had been a key ally in getting the word out to local communities and had been instrumental in spreading the campaign's message. This news came out of nowhere. Panic set in. His mind raced as he tried to understand what had gone wrong. Was it something he said? Did they disagree with the direction of the campaign? Had someone pulled out due to pressure? He quickly called Jason. "Hey man, you won't believe this. One of our biggest partners just dropped out. I don't even know why." Jason's tone was calm but concerned. "That's strange. Do you think it has something to do with the pushback we've been getting from those who disagree with the campaign?" Marcus didn't know. But there was something unsettling about the timing. The moment the campaign started gaining real traction, there was a push to take it down. And this withdrawal was just the beginning. Over the next few days, Marcus dug deeper. He reached out to several other organizations and individuals involved with the campaign, trying to find any clues as to what had happened. He discovered that there were whispers of dissent growing in some circles. A handful of people had begun to voice concerns over the movement's growing visibility, with some even accusing Marcus of hijacking the conversation for his own personal gain. Others felt that his message was too in your face, pushing a kind of activism they weren't comfortable with. Marcus knew this was the risk of making a statement as bold as the one they were trying to create. But he couldn't shake the feeling that some people were simply uncomfortable with the idea of challenging the status quo in such a public way. The threat of controversy seemed to follow every major step forward they made. The next blow came when a video surfaced online. It was a clip from a recent interview Marcus had done where he was asked about the role of bystanders in moments of injustice. Marcus, in typical fashion, spoke candidly, emphasizing that everyone had a responsibility to act, not just watch. However, the video was edited in a way that made it appear as though Marcus was suggesting that people who didn't act were cowards. The backlash was swift and brutal. Critics jumped on the opportunity to accuse Marcus of being overly harsh, of being too judgmental. Some even suggested that his approach to encouraging people to step up was too extreme and that it could create further division rather than unity. Marcus felt the weight of it all. It wasn't just a handful of critics anymore. This was beginning to affect the core of the campaign. People who had been following the movement from the start started to question his leadership. The negative comments and attacks became relentless, flooding his social media accounts and even reaching into his personal life. The pressure was beginning to suffocate him. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment, staring at the barrage of messages on his phone, he felt completely overwhelmed. Every new notification felt like another weight pressing down on him. He had started this campaign to inspire change, but now it seemed like he was failing. The comments were harsh, the messages from former supporters were laced with disappointment, and the future of the movement was uncertain. He needed space. He needed to step back and think things through. That night, Marcus decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would help clear his mind. It was late, and the streets were quiet, the city's lights casting long shadows across the pavement. He walked aimlessly, his thoughts swirling. What was the point of all this? Was it worth it? Had he made a mistake by trying to change the world in the first place? As he walked, he passed by a small park. Sitting on one of the benches was an older man who looked like he had been there for some time. Marcus stopped, unsure why he was drawn to the man, but something about the scene seemed oddly comforting. The old man was reading a book, his face relaxed despite the bustle of the city around him. Marcus hesitated, then sat down beside him. The man didn't seem to notice him at first, but when Marcus spoke, he looked up with a warm smile. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" the man said, his voice kind and steady. Marcus nodded, then sighed deeply. "Yeah, but it feels like everything is falling apart." The man didn't respond immediately, just continued reading his book. After a few moments, he closed it and looked at Marcus. "Sometimes it feels that way," he said, "but that doesn't mean it's the end. It just means you need a moment to breathe. You can't solve everything in a day, and you can't control how others see you. You can only control what you do." Marcus looked at the old man, surprised by his calmness. "But what if I'm not doing enough? What if people are right, and I'm just making things worse?" The old man smiled again. "The world doesn't change because of one person. It changes because many people, sometimes thousands or millions, decide they want to make it better. And those people, they keep pushing, even when it's hard. Even when others doubt them." Marcus nodded slowly, the weight on his shoulders feeling just a little lighter. It wasn't a grand solution, but it was enough to remind him that the journey wasn't just about the immediate results. It was about persistence. As he stood up to leave, the old man offered a parting piece of advice. "Don't quit. It's the ones who stay in the game, even when it's tough, who make the real difference. You keep doing your part and the rest will follow." Marcus left the park that night feeling somewhat renewed. He still had a long way to go to get the campaign back on track, but for the first time in days, he felt a sense of clarity. There would always be setbacks, always be critics. But if he stayed true to why he started the campaign in the first place, if he stayed focused on the message, he could weather the storm. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but Marcus knew that if he was going to see this through, he needed to do what the old man had said. Keep pushing no matter what. And so he did. The journey was far from over. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe. The next chapter is just beginning. The days following his conversation with the old man at the park felt like a turning point for Marcus. While the challenges were far from over, he had gained a new perspective. The weight of the world didn't seem as heavy when he allowed himself to pause, reflect, and remember the core reasons he started the Stand Up, Speak Out campaign. The journey wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. He had to keep moving forward no matter how difficult it seemed. Marcus spent the next few weeks focusing on rebuilding the campaign. He reached out to the community of supporters who had rallied around him from the start, asking for their help. He created open spaces for dialogue, encouraging people to share their thoughts, not just on the campaign, but on the issues of injustice and inequality that it sought to address. The movement was never meant to be about him. It was about them, about all of them, working together for change. Slowly but surely, people began to notice. The negativity that had once dominated his feeds was still there, but it started to dwindle. It was replaced with voices of support, People who were ready to continue the fight, people who wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. There was a resurgence of energy in the movement, one that came from a place of shared purpose, not from the pressure of external expectations. But even as things began to look brighter, Marcus knew there were still tough decisions ahead. He had spent the past few months rethinking his stance on partnering with larger organizations. After much thought, he decided to start small, seeking partnerships with grassroots organizations and local businesses that aligned with the movement's values. He knew that if he was going to work with corporations, it had to be on his terms. 1 day, Marcus received a call that would prove to be one of the most important moments in the campaign's journey. It was from Keanu. "Marcus," Keanu said on the other end, his voice filled with urgency. "I think I've found a way to take things to the next level, but this time it's on your terms." Keanu had been talking to a group of influential figures who were passionate about social justice, but had been hesitant to publicly support a movement like Stand Up, Speak Out. These people weren't interested in profit. They were interested in real change. Keanu had convinced them that this was the right moment to jump in, to help amplify the voices of those who were already part of the movement. But they needed someone like Marcus, someone who was ready to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. Keanu's offer wasn't just about money or fame, it was about strategy. These individuals had the connections to take the campaign nationwide without sacrificing its integrity. They wanted to help Marcus build a coalition that would be focused on lasting change, one that would be sustainable and organic, not manufactured. "I'm all in," Marcus said without hesitation. "But it has to be about the people, always." Keanu chuckled. "Exactly, and we'll make sure it stays that way." The next few months were filled with meetings, planning sessions, and new partnerships. Slowly, Marcus and Keanu began to build the foundation of something bigger than they ever could have imagined. Together, they crafted a strategy that would allow Stand Up, Speak Out to reach more people, without losing its authenticity. They set up town halls, virtual forums, and community-based events where real conversations about injustice could take place. They worked on creating a platform where people could not only share their stories, but also find tangible ways to make a difference in their own communities. By the time the campaign launched its nationwide expansion, Marcus could feel the momentum building again. This time, though, it wasn't just his voice people were hearing. It was the voices of countless individuals who had been moved by the message. The campaign was no longer a single narrative. It was a collection of stories, a mosaic of experiences that together created a powerful force for change. And then the moment came. It was a Tuesday morning when Marcus received a call from an unexpected source, the same organization that had initially dropped out of the campaign. They wanted to meet. At first, Marcus was wary. He had moved on from the disappointment and focused on what was in front of him, but curiosity got the better of him, and he agreed to the meeting. When Marcus walked into the conference room, he was greeted by the familiar faces of the organization's leaders. They were respectful, but there was a noticeable shift in their demeanor. The conversation began awkwardly, but soon they got to the point. "We've been watching your progress," one of the leaders said, "and we were wrong to pull out earlier. What you've done with this campaign is something we should have supported from the start. We want to come back on board, this time with more than just financial support. We want to help take this campaign to the next level." Marcus was taken aback. He had come into the meeting prepared to defend his choices, but here they were admitting their mistake. They were willing to put their weight behind the campaign, not as a sponsor, but as genuine partners in the movement. After a long pause, Marcus smiled. "It's not about what you can give us anymore. It's about what we can do together." That moment marked a major shift for Marcus. The doubt, the setbacks, the pressure, it all seemed to fade away. This was the turning point he had been waiting for. The campaign was no longer a one-man show. It was now a movement of people who believed in the cause and were ready to see it through. With his new partners, Marcus could expand the reach of Stand Up, Speak Out and ensure it remained true to its original mission, to encourage people everywhere to stand up for what's right, no matter how difficult or controversial. They set their sights on national campaigns, social media outreach, and real-world events designed to create positive change. And as for Keanu, he remained a steady presence by Marcus's side, offering advice when needed and supporting the mission without fanfare. Together, they built a coalition that was about more than just visibility. It was about real, lasting change in the communities that needed it most. As Marcus watched the campaign unfold before him, he realized that this was just the beginning. There were still so many battles to be fought, so much work to be done. But for the first time in a long while, he felt confident that they could make a difference, together. It had been a long journey, one filled with ups and downs, but Marcus was no longer worried about the next challenge. He had learned that the real power of stand up, speak out was not in the size of the movement, but in the strength of the people who believed in it. The message was clear: stand up, speak out, and never back down. And so the movement continued, stronger than ever and more united than ever. Thank you for joining Marcus and Keanu on this incredible journey. The story doesn't end here, it's only just beginning. Don't forget to subscribe, stay tuned, and continue standing up for what's right. Together, we can make a difference.